Nathan Brooks had spent months picturing this day. The moment he would stand at the altar, looking into Emma's eyes, knowing he was about to begin the rest of his life with her. Every detail had been carefully planned, the venue, the flowers, the guest list. It was supposed to be perfect. The ceremony was set in an elegant chapel, decorated in warm candlelight and soft ivory drapes. Friends and family filled the pews, smiling, whispering excitedly as the music played. A hum of anticipation filled the air, a shared belief that they were witnessing the start of something beautiful. Emma stood beside him, her white gown cascading like silk waves, her veil tucked behind delicate curls. She was breathtaking, the picture of a bride ready to walk into forever. Her fingers laced with his, but they clutched his hand just a little too tightly, her grip stiff rather than affectionate. Nathan glanced at her, searching for the warmth that had always been there, but she kept her gaze locked forward, unreadable. Lately, there had been signs. Signs he had forced himself to ignore. Emma had become increasingly distant, her phone always within reach, screen tilted away from him. Late nights had become a routine, work meetings, she claimed, though she rarely spoke about them afterward. Her laughter, once easy and frequent, had become something measured, calculated. There had been moments when he caught her watching him with an expression he couldn't place, like she was waiting for something. Or someone. Despite the unease, Nathan had pushed the thoughts aside. Today wasn't the day for doubts. He loved Emma. She had chosen him. The officiant's voice rang through the chapel, steady and practiced. The vows were near. The final stretch before everything became official. If anyone has any reason why these two should not be joined in matrimony, speak now or forever hold your peace. A pause followed. A silence that should have passed in an instant. Then the doors to the chapel burst open with a loud crash. A collective gasp rippled through the room as all heads turned toward the back. The once warm atmosphere turned frigid in a single heartbeat. Nathan's pulse spiked, a cold knot tightening in his stomach before he even saw the face of the intruder. Josh stood in the doorway, his chest rising and falling as if he had just sprinted. His usual easygoing demeanor was gone, replaced with something sharp, something dangerous. His face was pale with barely contained fury, his jaw tight. Murmurs spread like wildfire through the guests, people shifting uncomfortably in their seats. The weight of hundreds of eyes fell on him, yet Josh only had his gaze locked onto one person. Nathan. In his outstretched hand, the glow of a phone screen illuminated something that made Nathan's stomach drop. Something he wasn't ready to see. Something that was about to rip his perfect world apart. Nathan barely felt the weight of the phone in his hands, but the tension pressing down on his chest was suffocating. The glow of the screen illuminated words he never should have had to read. The silence in the chapel stretched, thick and unbreakable, as his eyes moved over the messages. It was Emma. Texting him. Her ex. The words blurred for a moment, his brain refusing to fully process what was right in front of him. But as he read them again, clarity struck like a knife to the gut. I can't wait for this wedding to be over so I can finally see you again. Nathan is safe. You're exciting. You know I could never actually leave you. His breath caught in his throat. Every message scrolled like a death sentence for the life he had been ready to build. The warmth of the chapel disappeared. The laughter, the soft glow of candles, the music, it all faded into a dull, distant hum. She had been lying. 4 months. Sneaking behind his back, weaving deception into every, I love you, she had whispered in the dark. The weight of realization settled into his bones. The late-night work meetings. The way she had pulled away when he touched her. The locked phone. The moments when she looked at him, not with love, but with hesitation. Every single thing made sense now. A sharp murmur spread through the chapel as guests began to piece together what was happening. Shifting in their seats, whispering to one another. Some covered their mouths, others glanced nervously toward Emma. Emma. Nathan barely recognized her now. She had gone pale, her posture stiff, hands frozen in front of her as if she could physically stop the truth from reaching him. Her carefully crafted poise cracked at the edges, panic flickering behind her eyes. The silence between them stretched unbearably. A normal man might have felt his knees buckle. Might have dropped the phone, stormed out in humiliation, let the weight of betrayal crush him into dust. But Nathan wasn't like that. Instead, something shifted inside him. A cold, unexpected calm settled over him, freezing every chaotic thought into razor-sharp focus. Then, without warning, a laugh bubbled up in his chest. Not a bitter, broken laugh. Not the laugh of a man who had just had his world ripped out from under him. It was smooth. Amused, even. The kind of laugh that sent a ripple of confusion through the room. The kind of laugh that told everyone he was still in control. The whispers halted. Eyes widened. He reached for the champagne glass sitting on a nearby table, the stem cool against his fingertips. With deliberate ease, he lifted it high, his expression unreadable. Emma's breath hitched. The air was electric now, anticipation crackling between every person in the room. Nobody dared to move. Nobody dared to speak. Then, with his voice steady and unwavering, he gave them something to talk about. The silence in the chapel stretched unbearably, thick with anticipation. Every pair of eyes was locked on Nathan, waiting, bracing for the explosion that should have come. But instead of anger, instead of devastation, there was only effortless composure. Nathan turned toward the band with an easy, almost amused expression, making a small motion with his hand. A simple gesture, but one that shattered the tension like glass. The music hesitated for only a second before the melody picked up again, uncertain but steady, filling the room with a rhythm that felt surreal in the face of what had just happened. The confused energy in the crowd shifted. At first, it was a ripple, one or two hesitant chuckles, the kind that slipped out when nerves took over. Then, like wildfire catching dry grass, it spread. Josh, standing near the front, lifted his own champagne glass, his grin unmistakable. His voice rang through the hall with effortless confidence, carrying over the guests. The words landed like a match tossed into gasoline. And just like that, laughter erupted. Not polite, uncomfortable laughter. Not the kind meant to mask a room's awkwardness. This was something else entirely. This was relief, an unspoken agreement among the guests that if this was going to fall apart, then at least it would be memorable. Applause followed, hesitant at first, then more enthusiastic. The tension in the room transformed into something celebratory, as if they had just witnessed a great plot twist in a story unfolding before them. Emma, still frozen at the altar, remained the only one untouched by the shift. Her fingers trembled at her sides, her carefully curated wedding day slipping through her grasp like sand. The smile she had worn so effortlessly earlier was gone, replaced by something else. Something hollow. Her father, seated in the front row, had his head in his hands. Beside him, her mother sat stiffly, her lips pressed into a thin line, unwilling or unable to meet anyone's gaze. The bridesmaids exchanged glances, their whispering now frantic and uncertain. Some clutched their bouquets like lifelines, unsure whether to step forward and comfort Emma or pretend they didn't know her at all. One of them, Mia, the one who had always seemed more like an acquaintance than a friend, sighed, placed her bouquet on the nearest table, and reached for a glass of wine instead. Nathan barely registered them. His focus had shifted elsewhere. Something, or rather someone, had caught his attention. Near the back of the room, hovering near the last row of chairs, was a figure trying very hard to blend into the background. But it was impossible now, too many eyes were searching for answers, too many people putting the puzzle pieces together in real time. It was him. The other guy. The ex. The one whose name had appeared again and again in the messages. The one Emma had promised herself to while standing next to another man at the altar. Nathan took his time, letting his gaze settle on him, his expression unreadable. The man, tall, dark-haired, dressed just a little too sharply for a wedding he had no business attending, shifted uncomfortably, looking anywhere but at Nathan. His hands clenched at his sides, as if preparing for a confrontation. But there was no confrontation. Only a slow, deliberate smirk from Nathan as he casually lifted his champagne glass in the man's direction. A silent toast. A message loud enough for the entire room to understand. The ex had won, hadn't he? He had stolen something he thought was valuable. He had convinced Emma to lie, to manipulate, to throw away a future with a man who had given her everything. But looking at him now, exposed, humiliated, barely holding himself together under the weight of an entire room's scrutiny, Nathan realized something. He hadn't won at all. He had inherited a problem. A problem in a white wedding dress, standing at the altar, watching everything unravel. A fresh round of laughter rippled through the guests, followed by the unmistakable sound of clinking glasses. The bartender, who had been watching the spectacle unfold with barely contained amusement, let out a low whistle. Emma stood motionless, her skin drained of all color, her breathing shallow. The weight of it all finally crashed down on her. This wasn't just a momentary embarrassment. This wasn't something she could talk her way out of later, some minor mistake that could be spun into a misunderstanding. This was public. This was irreversible. And worst of all, Nathan wasn't the one drowning in humiliation. She was. Emma had been silent for too long. The weight of humiliation, the whispers, the shifting gazes, she felt it all pressing against her like an unbearable force. But then, as if snapping out of a daze, she finally moved. Her heels clicked against the polished floor as she took a small, hesitant step forward. Her lips parted, forming words too soft for anyone to hear at first. She tried again, her voice louder, desperate, pleading. Nathan remained still, his expression unreadable. The eyes of the guests darted between them, waiting to see what he would do, if he would listen, if there was any chance of reconciliation. But before she could say another word, Nathan lifted a hand, a simple, controlled motion that cut through the air like a blade. The message was clear. Enough. A hush settled over the crowd once again. Slowly, deliberately, he reached into the inner pocket of his jacket, fingers brushing against paper. He pulled it out, unfolded it with precise, practiced ease, and held it up for everyone to see. A single sheet, pristine white, crisp edges. The marriage certificate. The final piece of the illusion she had clung to. Emma's breath hitched. All color drained from her face as realization dawned. Nathan let the silence linger, let the weight of the moment press into her. Then, with the same calmness he had carried through the entire spectacle, he made his move. His grip on the document tightened for a fraction of a second. Then, with effortless certainty, he tore it in half. The sound of the paper ripping sliced through the room, sharp and absolute. Then again. And again. The pieces fluttered to the floor, weightless, meaningless, just like the vows she had been moments away from exchanging. A collective gasp rippled through the audience. Some people clasped their hands over their mouths, others exchanged wide-eyed glances. Emma's body tensed, her hands twitching at her sides as if she might lunge forward and try to piece it all back together. But there was no fixing this. Nathan remained unfazed, his face set in an expression so calm, so controlled, that it sent an unmistakable message. He wasn't hurt. He wasn't broken. He was free. Lifting the champagne flute still resting lightly between his fingers, he brought it to his lips. The sip was slow, unbothered, savoring the moment like a man tasting victory. Then, without another glance in Emma's direction, he turned. The guests parted instinctively, making way as he strode down the aisle, not a man rejected, not a groom abandoned, but someone who had just dodged the greatest mistake of his life. The party continued behind him. The music played on. But Emma? She stood in the wreckage of the day that was supposed to be hers. And for the first time, she realized that Nathan hadn't been the one left behind. She had. The fallout from the wedding disaster didn't just stay within the chapel walls. Within hours, the story had spread beyond the guests, beyond the town, and onto the internet, where it took on a life of its own. Someone, maybe a guest, maybe a staff member, had recorded the entire thing. The grand reveal, the champagne toast, the way Nathan had remained unshaken while Emma stood crumbling in the wake of her own betrayal. Clips circulated across social media, racking up millions of views. People dissected every moment, analyzing his every move, replaying the precise second Emma realized she had lost. The comments flooded in. A masterclass in handling betrayal. That man didn't just dodge a bullet, he dodged an entire artillery strike. She really thought she could get away with it. Legendary response. The humiliation for Emma wasn't just local anymore. It was global. Her fairy tale wedding, the one she had meticulously planned, the one she had envisioned as the start of her perfect life, had instead become a permanent stain on her reputation. No matter how much she wanted to rewrite the narrative, the internet had already chosen its villain. She stopped showing her face around town. Even those who might have sympathized with her found it difficult when faced with undeniable proof of her deception. The texts had been laid bare, and the public had already delivered its verdict. As for the ex, the one she had risked everything for, his role in the disaster became just as infamous. At first, he tried to act smug, wearing his involvement like some twisted badge of honor. But it didn't take long for reality to set in. Emma hadn't just betrayed Nathan. She had gambled on the wrong man. The thrill of sneaking around had been fun for her ex, but the aftermath? The whispers, the pointed stares, the fact that he had been reduced to a footnote in another man's story? That was something he had no interest in. Within days, he disappeared from her life entirely. Whatever fantasy she had built around him collapsed the moment she realized she wasn't his secret anymore, she was his problem. And Nathan? He made sure she lost more than just a husband. The financial side of things had always been in his name. The joint account, the one she had been happily dipping into for months, was frozen before she could touch another cent. She had spent his money on the venue, the catering, the dress. And now, with no wedding, there was no reason for him to pay for any of it. The apartment? That lease was in his name. She had 48 hours to pack whatever she could carry and find somewhere else to go. To ensure she got the message, Josh left a parting gift, printouts of her text messages, neatly taped to the apartment door, for any curious neighbors who had missed the wedding spectacle. There was no negotiation. No last-minute pleas. She was simply done. Nathan, on the other hand, had no interest in sulking. He had wasted enough of his time on a woman who had never deserved it. A week later, he found himself at a familiar bar, the kind of place where the drinks were cold, and the company was better. Josh was with him, the man who had saved him from the biggest mistake of his life. The betrayal? The anger? All of it had faded into something else now. Something lighter. Nathan raised his glass, a smirk playing at the corner of his lips. Josh mirrored the gesture, clinking his drink against Nathan's with an approving nod. The sip that followed was slow, deliberate, the taste of freedom, of knowing he had walked away with his dignity intact while she had lost everything. The wedding had been a disaster. But for Nathan? It had been the best thing that had ever happened to him.